Good morning. Today we'll look at Mark 4, verses 1 through 53. It's a combination of yesterday's and today's readings. And it begins with, it was 2 days before the Passover and the festival of unleavened bread. And, this was, an annual tradition, the Passover. And I've talked about that quite a bit lately, it seems. But it was an important festival. And here now in Mark's gospel, this would be the third Passover that Jesus is in Jerusalem for, or nearby Jerusalem anyway. He's at the house of Simon the leper in Bethany. And a lot of times when he's in Bethany, he stays with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, it seems. But, he had other friends, other followers, other people that were important as well. And Simon the leper is one that he had cured of leprosy and then became an ardent follower of Jesus. And so he was there having a meal, sitting at the table, it said, and a woman with an alabaster jar comes. And this woman, opens this jar, pours it on his head, and anoints him. And it says there were some that said to one another in anger, "Why was this wasted?" And they scold the woman, is what Mark says, and they scolded her. And Jesus said, "Let her alone, because you don't know what she's done. She's performed a good service." I mean, he knows that in just a couple days, he's going to be crucified. He knows that the end is just imminent that way. And he says, "You always have the poor with you," because they, the ones who were angry and scolding this woman had thought that this, the 300 denarii, that this was a costly jar of oil, A denarii was a day's wages, so a year's worth of work for this jar of oil. A tremendous giving, tremendous offering that way, and and it shows the devotion of this woman and how much. In John's gospel it says that this woman was Mary, and we have different ideas of who it may or may not have been, depending on the gospel writer, but. Regardless of which woman it was, this woman gave much for Jesus. And as much as, and Jesus says that the world will remember this woman, they will be told of her. And we do, we hear of this in the gospel. So we know this happened. And this seemed to be the final straw for Judas. And after just a short time after this, he went out and, it says, went to the chief priests in order to betray Jesus to them. And they were greatly pleased, and Judas started to look for an opportunity to betray Jesus. And then, this is evidently the next day, on the first day of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb is sacrificed, so there was tradition, there was history. The Passover wasn't just a one-day, one-meal deal. It was, the Passover, the original, they slaughtered the lamb, they ate the meat, they put the blood on the doorpost, and the Passover happened, and the next day then was, the festival of unleavened bread, because they had been told they wouldn't have time to bake bread in the morning, and just, so the first day, second day, going on here. But, the disciples asked, where do you want to join? Where do you want to celebrate, observe the Passover with us? And Jesus sends two of the disciples, go and follow a man who is carrying a jar of oil, and say to the owner of the house that he goes into that the master wants to utilize his house for the Passover. And they were shown an upper room that was ready. It said, "He will show you a large upstairs room, furnished and ready, make preparations there." So they went and they found it, just as Jesus said. And again, here it's, Jesus, even though he's fully human right now yet, he's fully human living on this earth, yet he knows what's upcoming. He knows what's going on, and he can, he's telling the disciples just exactly what it is, and it all comes to pass. And as they're having this meal, he tells them, that one of them is going to betray him. And they have this conversation, this wondering, well, who? And Jesus says, well, one of you is going to, but you're all going to fall away. You're all going to deny me. And, that goes up to verse 31, that, they all say they won't fall away. They won't deny him. And Jesus said, yeah, you're all going to. So in a way, they all betrayed Jesus. They betrayed his leadership. They betrayed his lordship. Judas is the one that betrayed him to the chief priests, to the crowd. But each and every one of the disciples turned away from Jesus. They all didn't admit knowing him, basically, in some ways. They ran away with fear for their own lives. And I'm sure that I would have been right in that same crowd. I can't imagine that I would have done any differently. And nor would you. Because we've all, at some point in time, it's not always easy to be firm in our faith, to witness our faith in everything that we do. And sometimes, when, especially growing up as a child, as a teenager, as a young adult, we kind of want to fit in. And sometimes we do things to fit in with the crowd that might take us away from Jesus, that might separate us, that might be a little bit of a betrayal. But yet, like the disciples, Peter followed at a distance, and in Mark's gospel, there was one young man that followed at a distance, and we'll get into that. But at this meal, Jesus says, one of you is going to betray me. But even though he knew one was going to betray him, he took bread, blessed it, broke it, gave it to them all to eat. Same with a cup of wine, blessed it, distributed it, said, take and drink, all of you, and they all did. And so even though he knew that Judas was the betrayer, Judas was a part of that Last Supper. And in some ways, to me, that says that even right there and right then, Jesus was saying to Judas, you have the opportunity. You are still one of mine. My death, my resurrection is for you. But then again, we confess our sins and we turn away, and then we're forgiven. But here Judas went on ahead and betrayed and felt remorseful, and Judas knew that he had done wrong, but it was too late by the time he had admitted that and came to that point. Jesus tells the disciples they will strike the shepherd and the sheep will scatter. And this is when, of course, they say, no, we're going to remain faithful. And as I said, they didn't. They all fell away. And but even though Jesus has pointed out to them that they are all going to scatter, he goes to the Garden of Gethsemane to pray. And the disciples go with him. And then most of 8 of them stay in one spot because Judas has already, gone to betray him. 8 of them stay, and then Peter, James, and John go with him a little ways, and Jesus separates himself and prays 3 times and comes back and finds the disciples sleeping each time. And we sometimes wonder, well, how could they fall asleep when they know what's going to happen? They don't know what's going to happen. And they're tired. It's late at night, and it's been maybe a hard day, and I know what it's like. Sometimes at night you sit down and you think you're reading, and pretty quick you're sleeping a little bit, or you're doing whatever. It's easy to drift off. And so I totally understand the disciples sleeping. And after the 3rd time Jesus comes back, Judas comes. And it says he comes with, he comes and he has told them the one I will kiss is the one to arrest. And they came with a crowd with swords and clubs from the chief priests. And as I said when we talked about this in Matthew's gospel, it wasn't the Roman soldiers that came to arrest Jesus. It was a crowd that was stirred up by the chief priests, by the religious leaders, that came with swords and clubs. And many of these people had been the same ones that had cheered for Jesus, had welcomed Jesus, had been overjoyed to see Jesus, maybe some of them had been healed by Jesus. But all of a sudden, the tables were turned, and a crowd came, kind of a riot, more or less, to speak, And one of the disciples takes a sword and it says strikes the slave of the high priest. And Jesus heals that ear again as well. But this certain young man following him after the crowd has taken Jesus away, the certain young man, it's believed then would be the writer of this gospel, Mark. And he was wearing, it says, nothing but a linen cloth. I mean, he was ready for bed, ready for nighttime. And as they saw him, they recognized who he was. And they grabbed his clothing, but he was quick enough, and it says he ran away naked. I mean, and in some ways, that reminds me that, God knows everything about us. I mean, we can't cover up anything. Right now I got a sweatshirt on, I got a t-shirt on, I got clothes on, and so you can't see all of me. And that's good. But God can see all of me. I mean, he sees all of my sins, all of my failings, all of my wrongdoings, but he also sees my good. But we cannot hide anything from God. And I think some ways that this young man running away naked is a reminder that, in God's eyes, we hide nothing from God. Just like Jesus says, all of you will fall away. And they all said, no, we won't. Jesus knew. And Jesus knows us as well that way too. And he knows that despite all of our good intentions, sometimes the naked truth comes out. And as I know, I shared a post a while ago about truth and a lie going into a well or going in to swim together. And the lie comes out and dresses with the clothing of the truth, and people see the lie as the truth, and when the truth comes, no one listens because the truth is naked. But the naked truth is that God sees all of our faults, all of our failings, and yet sent Jesus to die on the cross for us. We are an open book to God. We hide nothing from him. And I guess that's enough for today. And knowing that we hide nothing from God, yet God loves us, and we have God's blessings. May you live in that love and grace today, as always.